Turn in your Bibles to the book of Habakkuk, if you can find it. It's not one of those well-known books, but it ought to be because of the message that we have here from this prophet of God. We have a lot of people in our world that ask questions. And that's what we're going to look at. I want you to open your Bibles to this book because we're going to read quite a bit of this letter, just 3 chapters to it. But the subject is something of vital importance to us, and that is asking questions and getting answers. There was a little boy that went into his father and mother one day. He's about 8 or 9 years old, and he looks up at his dad, and he says, "Dad, where did I come from?" Well, Mom gives Dad the look, and she leaves the room and decides this is the discussion between Dad and the little boy. So he begins teaching him about the facts of life, and in a very, very explicit way describes impregnation and describes the pregnancy and the birth and the whole ball of wax. And after he gets done, he says to his little boy, "Does that make sense to you?" And he said, "Yes. You see, my friend Joey said he came from Melbourne, Australia, and I was just wondering where I came from." There are times that we ask questions, and the more serious questions come to mind here, and somewhere along the line, we were taught, or I was taught, or somewhere along the line accepted the fact that you're not supposed to ask God questions. Now, I want you to know that is a bunch of baloney. Okay? He wants us to ask. Now, to show contempt toward God, absolutely not. Okay? I think of Thomas. He asked the question, is this real or not? And what did Jesus do? He appeared and answered the question that he had. So there are no problems with asking God questions. Psalm 13, the writer writes this, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and every day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, O Lord my God. Give me light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death." If I don't get an answer, the psalmist says, I'm going to die. That I've got to have some kind of answer here of what's going on. Psalm 82:2, "How long will you defend the unjust and show partiality to the wicked?" Psalm 94, verse 3, "How long will the wicked, O Lord, how long will the wicked be jubilant?" It's a question that I'm sure that we've all asked. I hope we have somewhere along the line, is the fact that why does it appear that evil and wicked are winning? If you're such a God that is so good and so just, why is it that things are not going the way that they ought to? In the Bible, we see people that ask big questions of God. People of faith are going to ask questions of God. We want to know what God's will really is. And Habakkuk is one that is going to ask the questions he's not shy about. He's asking questions that we ask today. We're going to read those questions here in just a few moments. God is not afraid of our questions. You know why? Because he's got the answer. Okay? When my dad was very ill in the hospital, I'm not going to go through all of that. I won't tell you what hospital it was, but his treatment was far less than what it should have been, and Dad ended up dying. And I can remember the doctor that was coming to visit Dad near the last of his life, and he was the doctor that, as far as Joe is convinced of, that messed up. He did not treat Dad correctly, and some things happened, and Dad's life came to an end. But I can remember him, he's come into the room, and I was down there on purpose to see him because I had some questions I needed to ask. And my sister Mary was there, and she was afraid that there would be a big problem. I can't imagine me causing a problem. Can you?
Yeah.
Who said that? Okay. Anyway. So the doctor comes in, and when he comes into the room, my sister Mary says, "Now, Joe, he's the doctor, and he doesn't like to be questioned." And I just turned to the doctor and spoke to my sister Mary while looking at him. I said, "I don't know of anybody that knows what they're doing that minds questions." And he just stared at me. If this doctor knew what he was doing, he would have no fear of the questions I was about to ask. It's the same thing with God. He knows the answer. He's not afraid of our questions. We need to voice those questions instead of not allowing them to be a part of this. Questions like, why do you let these things happen? Why did you let this happen to me? Why is this in my life? We can just keep asking those questions, and that's what we're going to look at today. Why me? Why me? I want you to read with me Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, and look at the questions that he is asking. The oracle that Habakkuk the prophet received. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Ever ask that question? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted. You ever had thoughts like that go through your mind? As you look at what's going on, not just in our own lives, but in the world in which we live? Habakkuk wants to know. He wants to know. So the first thing we're going to look at is his statement of concern and confusion. Why does God let pain and evil continue? Why is he allowing these things to happen to us? We become very frustrated. We become very discontented with what we see going on in our lives and our attempt to do what is right in God's eye and constantly having bad things happen to us. We're waiting for something good to happen, but it never seems to happen. It never seems to happen. You know, we're talking about Rich, and Rich is improving slowly, but he called me yesterday, and informed me that I had borrowed some money from the bank and sent it to him, and that they had some kind of plumbing problem at their house, and to get it fixed cost him just about everything I just sent him for his hospital bills. And he said, Dad, I can't catch a break. Now, see, I don't see it that way. My view was, I'm glad I borrowed the money, Rich, so you had it to pay. Now, you're not another $1,000 in the hole as far as your hospital bills and all this is concerned. But if you were rich, and a month ago your life was absolutely okay, and you're working, and all at once, now you're at home, he is improving, but folks, he's got a long ways to go here. And then something else happens. Have you ever been in that spot where it seems like everything wrong's happening all at once, one more thing, and you're sitting there saying, come on, something good needs to happen to keep us going back in the right direction here, to hold on to the hope that we have. When he had his stroke, I think I shared with you that when I got down there on that Saturday, from Saturday to Tuesday, every test that came back, every report that came back, it was worse than what they thought. And I'm standing there saying, come on, God, give us something to hold on to here. I know that you're doing something here, and I'm trying to convince Rich of that. Just hold on. And eventually it did happen. It's like the boys that were out camping one night, and the mosquitoes were just thick. So they decided instead of sitting around the campfire, they're going to go back into their tent. Well, they went back in the tent, but they could hear these mosquitoes outside. And finally, one little boy opened up the tent, and he looked out, and he saw all these fireflies. And he jumped back in the tent, and he saw my guys that are coming after us with flashlights. Ever felt that way? That everything it got worse and worse and worse. You can't figure out what's going on. Here, I believe in you, God, but what's happening here? And Habakkuk is asking those questions. In times when it's really hard, and see how do we see that God fits into life? Why does evil always seem to win out in our world today? Does it not? It always seems like that the good never prevails, except hopefully in the state of Texas. I say that because, you know, the governor just signed that new abortion law that is pretty much going to close all the abortion clinics in Texas and making it very, very difficult to do. Texas. Now, so it's just the rest of the states that catch on to what's going on. We live in a world of injustice. We live in a world of pain. And we ask God, Habakkuk is asking God, why don't you do something about it? Why don't you do something, God? Read with me verses 5 through 11. Look at the nations and watch, and be utterly amazed. For I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. I'm raising up the Babylonians, this ruthless and impetuous people, who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwelling places not their own. Now I'm going to stop there because the rest of that passage, he just describes the Chaldeans, the Babylonians. Okay? So when Habakkuk is standing back here saying, God, why don't you do something? God's answer is, I am. I am. And if I told you what it was, Habakkuk, you wouldn't believe me. You're not even going to fathom what I'm about to do here. Folks, it's the same way in our world today. When we ask God, why don't you do something, his answer is what? I am. I am. And you wouldn't believe me if I told you what I was doing. And God continues to work. He continues to work. And that's his answer. You see, the big problem is that we want God to fit into our thinking. We want him to take care of the way we think it ought to be taken care of. There's the problem. I remember one day a lady asked me, said, Joe, why doesn't God just get rid of all the wickedness and evil in the world? And my answer was, where does that put you and me? Because we're in that group ourselves, are we not? He's got this plan. He's working. He is working. And if we don't think he is, I guess the main thing I would say then is we're not looking. We're not perceiving what's going on around us. We're not watching to see what God is doing among us. And he is. That sometimes, like I said, we're so caught up in what we want. We become so blinded. We become so selfish. Here's what I think would be right. And God is saying, no, Joe, if that turns out that way, it's going to be a mess. I've got this. I've got this, Joe. I know what I'm doing. You can ask these tough questions because I've got the answers to this. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10, is Paul's discussion about the thorn in the flesh. Paul's got some kind of physical problem that he wants to get rid of. Now, I believe he had malaria. I believe that he was blinded and had these terrible headaches. He had to have a doctor constantly with him. His traveling mate was a man named Luke. What was Luke's profession? He's a doctor, and I think that was by necessity. And Paul is sitting there, and I would be doing the same thing. He is saying, if I didn't have this problem, man, how I could serve you, God. If I was physically well, I could do all these things for you much better, God, than I'm doing. So please. Now, it says he prayed 3 times. That's the idea of intensity. That he really, really wants this thorn in the flesh removed. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? What does God say? No. I got this handled, Paul. Okay? Because of what you're going through, you're having to learn to depend upon me. My grace is sufficient. And Paul finally gets that message from God and says, what? I'll rejoice in my sufferings. Because when I am weak, then I'm strong. When I learn to depend upon him, it's okay. We talk about Job. Job's question is, why am I going through this? How did God answer Job about that question? The answer is, he didn't. He never gave him any answer why. All he said to Job was, I'm with you. I got this handled. Folks, I don't care what's going on in your life. I care. But don't be greatly concerned because God's got it handled. Whatever it is, he's got it handled. He knows what he's doing. Okay? Let's continue on here. So God says to Habakkuk, I've got this handled. Okay? I'm in control of this. It's going to be okay. And I'm going to raise up these Babylonians, these ruthless, wicked people. And God is going to use the Babylonians to judge the Judah and take them into captivity. Okay? So when he says that to Habakkuk, Habakkuk's question then, read with me, beginning in verse 12. O Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, we will not die. O Lord, you have appointed them, speaking of the Chaldeans, to execute judgment. O Rock, you have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrong. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? Now I'm going to stop there. What is he saying? Babylonians are worse than we are. Why are you going to use them to do what you say that you're going to do? Habakkuk is broken and hurt. He is overwhelmed with what's going on in our world. If you would live in Habakkuk's world, you'd have the same concerns that we have now. The corruption, Socially, religiously, politically, economically, everything is going down the tubes. It's just falling apart, and morally it's doing the same thing also. I just read a report on our teenage children that attend church on a regular basis, and their view of morality and immorality is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Well, I believe in Jesus. I go to church every Sunday, but 87% saw absolutely nothing wrong with premarital sex. They see absolutely nothing wrong with drug use. The use of alcohol. I mean, you go on and you're looking at, and these are the good kids. Good kids. Okay? So we look, we say, everything is falling apart. Everything is falling apart. Apparent, senseless experiences of life. Apparent, senseless events in the world around us. God is not making His presence felt. He seems so far away. You ever felt that at times? It just seemed like God was miles and miles and miles away. But He's not letting Himself be known to us when we're here. And God, the Chaldeans, this ruthless people, this ungodly people, you're going to use them to accomplish your will? It has been my experience that God uses the most unlikely things to accomplish His will. He always does. To us, unlikely. But He always does. It's always there. You know, I read this true story that several years ago there was this farmer, this is about 40, 50 years ago, that he decided he was going to put his complete crop in corn, but he had no money. So he went to the bank and he borrowed enough money to plant his whole farm in corn. And he got the corn planted, it was just coming up, and here come this whole horde of grasshoppers. Ate all the corn. He had no money to pay the bank back. He didn't know what he was going to do. But he did do one of the wise things. He went to his church and he sat in the sanctuary and he prayed. And prayed to God, what am I supposed to do now? What should I do? And all he could get out of the prayer was, go let the chickens out. We didn't have a lot of chickens. He couldn't, and all the way home, that was the thought that was on his heart and mind. Let the chickens out. So he did. They ate the grasshoppers. The chickens flourished. And for the next several years, not only did he pay the bank back, he was able to be very successful farming by raising chickens, not corn. See, there are times we are so tunnel vision. Here's what's got to happen to work this out. Here's what we've got to do. And God's over here saying, no. I got this. I got this. Folks, honestly, you don't have to answer me, but answer yourself. Do we really believe that God is in control of all things? Do we really think that He is the authority over everything? That there is nothing outside of His power? If we don't, then you're going to have to reconsider whether you're a Christian or not, because that's the very basis. It's always amazing to me how people expect that God will get me into heaven, but He can't get me through tomorrow. That He's going to take care of me in all eternity, but I got to go out and make all the money I can make because that's the one thing I have to live on. And God's over saying, no, I got this. I got this. He is in control of all things. All things. We can't figure out why God doesn't do the things that we want Him to do, and He's sitting up there can't figure out why we won't do the things He's already told us to do. Trust Him. That sounds like a cliche, but that's exactly what He is saying to Habakkuk here, that He is saying to us. In a world that we thought God had abandoned, God is working. He always has. He always will be. Read with me, beginning in verse 2. Well, let's finish with chapter 2, verse 1, the end of Habakkuk's question. I will stand at my watch and station myself at the ramparts. I will look to see what He will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. I'm going to listen to what God has said. I don't understand why He is using an ungodly country to take my country, the godly people, to captivity. But I'm going to stand here. I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to stand here and I'm going to see what God has to say. I'm back to a song by Twilight of Paris. I see nothing in front of me, but I've made my stand. I'm going to stay right here with God until God shows me what He wants. And when I'm ready, and a line in that song, and don't worry, Daddy, I'm not going to sing it. I thought I saw you starting to get up. To find out when I'm ready to dream the dreams He has for me. See, we're so tied up in our own dreams, what we want to do, what we want to accomplish in life. What about the dreams that God has for us? What about those things that God's looking down and saying, boy, if you would just walk through this door, if you would just obey what my word says, all the blessings that are there for you. Now for God's answer, beginning in verse 2 of chapter 2. Then the Lord replied, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. Well, I could preach to you for an hour about this. Because what did God say to Habakkuk? You know what I told you, Habakkuk? Yeah, write it down. Because it's just as sure that it's going to happen as if it already has. And even if you have to wait, it's okay. It's going to happen at the right time. Exactly the right time. Look what he says. Verse 3, for the revelation awaits an appointed time. God has this figured out. He has got this down to a T. If He said that it's going to happen, it's going to happen at the time when God says that it's going to happen. The great concern, Habakkuk wants to know, God, why is all this going on? And God says to Habakkuk, trust me. I know what I'm doing. Folks, I have spent the last 6 weeks talking to my son, Rich, and we've done a lot of talking. And basically my message is this. It's okay, Rich. God's got this. He knows what's going on. And it has changed him. Not me. I'll give God the credit there. But Rich is not the same guy he was before. We've had conversations we've never had before. Because God has this. He knows what He's doing. He never does anything wrong. And whether we get the answer that we have prayed for, or whether we get the most dreaded news that we could ever think of, God is still God. He is still there. He is still on the throne. He hasn't changed. He hasn't left. Because I believe that something very valuable is lost if God takes away these painful experiences that we go through. That part of this is for our education, for our enlightenment. And if God would just take care of all the difficulties, we're going to lose something here. We're going to miss something that is very, very important. You can read, we're not going to get into it now, but Romans 5, where he goes through tribulation and eventually character, that all of this is planned out for our benefit, to purify us, to help us, to learn to rely upon Him. The year was 1809. There's a lot of famous things happened in 1809, but Simon Renee Gray and his wife Monique had their fourth son. His name was Louis. Now, Simon, the father, was a harness maker. This is a picture of his son as he grew up. And he had this workshop where he worked on these harnesses, and they told Louis that he could not go out there. That it was very dangerous for him to be out there with all these tools that he needed to stay out of the tool shop. But he did not. You know how boys are, right? So one day he is there playing in his father's workshop, and he finds an awl. And he ends up sticking himself in the eye with that awl. And there's an infection, and he keeps messing with the eye, and eventually Louis, by the time he's 4 years old, is blind. Now, he was very talented in other ways. He learned to play music, and he was then given an opportunity to go to university to study, but there's the problem, you see, he was blind. So he had, at one time, had understood a certain type of system that the French military had used called night writing that would enable them to read when they couldn't see. So he decided he could do something like that. So he needed some kind of instrument to use to make this happen. And lo and behold, the one thing that he found that would fit the bill was that all. Okay? Now, I pronounced their name in the way that the French would pronounce it, Brady, but in English we would pronounce it Braille. That through this terrible experience that Lewis went through and blinded, he invented Braille for all blind people to be able to read. Every time you step in an elevator, do you not? See those little bumps on there? Braille. Okay? What would have been missed if all that had not happened? And the same thing is true in our life. Are we not different people because of what we've gone through? Haven't we experienced some things that have, I hope, brought us closer to God, that cause our faith? You know, we always have that choice, either to come closer to God or blame God and go the other direction. But in the midst of all of this, what we call adversity, God calls opportunity. We could go on and on and on with all of this. You know, the Charles Johnson that worked in a sawmill and got fired. He's in his 40-some years old. And he didn't know what he was going to do. So he had some lumber in the backyard, and he built a couple little houses where they might be able to get rent from. And today that's called Howard Johnson's. All that because he got fired from his job. Okay? We go on and on about those things that happen and how we would miss something if we didn't go through those things. And it's true of us. It's true of us in the lives that we live. God's answer to Habakkuk is there's a whole lot more going on here, Habakkuk, than you realize. A lot more happening here than what you see, and I would suggest the same thing is true of us. There's a whole lot more going on behind the scenes here than we really, really understand. So what's our part? Lesson that I've learned is this. My role in all of this is just get out of God's way. That's my role. Because I've got my idea of what should happen here or what should happen there. And God would say, just get out of the way. I've got this going. I'm setting the scene now. I'm preparing this for exactly what needs to happen. Just get out of the way. I remember when the boys were very young, one of the things they wanted to do was help me mow the yard. Okay, I imagine many of you went through this. So you're standing there with a push mower like this, while they're standing in front of you holding on the handle. And what are they doing? They're helping you mow. Now it takes about 3 times the effort and the time to mow that yard. That's where we're at with God. He doesn't need me. He lets me. It'd be easier for him to do it on his own, but he lets me. But we need just to stay out of his way. We have our own ideas of how things should go. And God says what? Oh, just stay out of the way. Okay? Just play your part. And your part is to have your faith there before us. So finally in chapter 3, we're not going to be able to read all of this. But in chapter 3, Habakkuk has his prayer of trust and triumph. Okay, let's see where we can start here. How about verse 17? Okay, you can read the rest of the prayer there. He prays about God's sovereignty, that God is in control, that God is running the show. That's what this is about. But then what about your part of that? Let's read verse 17 through 19. Though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen, and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God my Savior. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to go on the heights. What happened? He's over here complaining in the first 2 chapters. Why aren't you doing this, God? And why don't you do that? And then finally in these verses, you understand what he just prayed to God? It doesn't matter how bad it gets. I'm going to trust in you, God. It doesn't matter if there's no food in the cupboard. It doesn't matter if there's none of this or that. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm going to trust in you. What changed? What changed? If you would turn back just one little page, chapter 2, verse 4 is what changed. See, he is puffed up, his desires are not upright, but the righteous will live by his faith. That's what changed. Faith, Habakkuk. In fact, that verse is so well known that it's quoted 2 times in the New Testament. Romans 1:17 and also in the book of Hebrews. The righteous shall live by faith. That is what God sees as faith. It is not a matter of as long as things are going good, I'll believe in you, but if things don't go so well, I'm gone. That happens a lot with people, doesn't it? It's a matter, I'm going to stand right here in my faith, no matter what. It doesn't matter how bad it gets. I'm going to be right here, right here. And you see, repentance and trust will reveal the reality of my faith. That standing here no matter what, no matter what. To trust God, even when he doesn't make sense. When it doesn't seem like everything is out of control, to trust him because he sits there upon the throne. There was a well-known missionary named Alex Grant. He was a missionary to China, and he got up in a meeting one night and he read Habakkuk 3:17 through 19. That no matter what happens, God, I'm going to trust in you. And he looked up to the crowd and he says, what? Now what is Satan going to do with a man like that? If I stand in my faith, what's Satan going to be able to do to me? See, the answer is nothing. If I stay in my faith, that Satan is not going to be able to pull me away. You see, there is a gap between having faith and living faithful lives. Waiting is not easy, but waiting is always a part of life. Isn't what he said to Habakkuk here is that even if it tarries for a while, even if it doesn't happen on your time schedule, just stay there. It's going to happen as sure as anything. Habakkuk did not get all the answers, but he learned the key to this is trusting God no matter what. No matter what. That faith strengthened Habakkuk. It sustains God's people today, that same faith. It doesn't matter. What happens around me and in my life is not going to change because my life is not governed by circumstance, it's governed by God. That I'm going to stick with you, God, and you're going to see me through. I know that you will. That God gives his presence, his power, and his promise. In Isaiah chapter 40, these words I have up on the screen, that we would understand what God is saying. Because in the midst of that, in verse 27, what do you say, O Jacob, and complain, O Israel? My way is hidden from the Lord. My cause is disregarded by God. Same complaint from Habakkuk. But what does Isaiah say? Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. That is the story that he gives Habakkuk. Don't mistake God's patience for absence. Do not mistake his patience for weakness. He is the God of the universe. He's in control of all things. And he knows that his timing is always perfect. His will is always perfect. And our life is not governed by circumstances, but by God. This is a true story that happened several years ago about a missionary in Africa. He was a medical missionary that he treated the people physically, he treated them spiritually, and he had been there for many, many years. And he had grown very old and unable to do his job, so the committee that was overseeing his efforts there thought it was time for a younger man to come in and take over. And sure enough, this young man came in. And he was there for a couple, 3 weeks. And finally he came to the old missionary and said to him, I think I'm going to go back home. I don't think I'm cut out for this. I think I'm just going to go back home. The missionary brought him over to a window in the house. He said, I want you to look out that window. What do you see? He said, I see a graveyard. He said, yeah. You see that first grave marker is my wife that died of malaria. The second is my daughter who died of malaria. Now, if you want to go home, you go ahead and go home, if that's what you need to do. But somewhere along the line, you've got to look beyond that first grave. And somewhere along the line, you need to look beyond that second grave. And all I know is one day when I get to heaven, there's going to be a lot of brown-skinned kids who will come up to me and say, thank you, doctor. You cured me and you saved me. And when he turned around and looked at the young missionary, he had tears going down his cheeks, and he looked at the old guy and said, I think I'm going to stay. I think I'm going to stay. No matter what. Folks, in our lives, we're going to have to look beyond the first grave, the second grave, those difficult times. We can't understand why these things happen. And understand that we may never. But I hope that our decision to God is the same decision as the missionary when we say to God, I think I'm going to stay. I think I'm going to stay. Our hymn of invitation and dedication this morning is Just As I Am. And that is the key to this, that just as we are right now, we can make that decision for God. We can decide that we're going to stay, that the righteous live by faith, no matter what the days ahead or what the days behind have had in store for us. I'm going to stay here with God because God is working out His perfect plan. We're going to sing verses 1 and 5. It's number 387 in our hymnal, Just As I Am. Let's stand together as we sing.